Hello, I am Mike.
And hello, I am Lily, and welcome to English Podcast Flow.
Today we're going to be tackling something that I think we can all relate to. You know, that feeling of having these big dreams, these huge ambitions, but also struggling with, well, maybe just a little bit of laziness sometimes,
Yeah.
especially when it comes to things like learning English. Now you're all here because you have this ambition. You want to improve your English skills, but taking those first steps or even just staying consistent can be really, really tough, and we get it.
Yeah. It appears that this kind of internal struggle is so common,
Yeah.
They have this picture in your head of yourself just speaking fluent English, navigating conversations with ease, maybe even traveling the world, but then
Right.
daily life kind of gets in the way and,
Yeah.
you know,
Yeah.
suddenly scrolling through social media or watching another episode of your favorite show feels a lot more appealing than actually sitting down to study vocabulary or practicing grammar.
It's like we're battling ourselves.
Right.
It's like in our heads, we know we want to achieve these goals. We know we want to do these things,
Mhm.
but then we hit this wall and procrastination just takes over.
Yeah.
So what is it about these big, ambitious goals that can make us freeze up? Like what makes us just avoid putting in the work even when we know that it's important to us?
Well, studies show that one of the biggest things is fear. These big goals like mastering a new language, they can be really intimidating.
Oh, yeah.
They just feel enormous, overwhelming, and that fear of failure, the fear of not being good enough, or even just the fear of the unknown, all of that can be completely paralyzing. I mean, when you're faced with something that seems so daunting, your natural instinct is to protect yourself by just avoiding it altogether.
That makes a lot of sense, yeah. I remember when I first started learning Spanish, I was so excited, but then I had this moment of panic, and I was like, what if I sound ridiculous?
Yeah.
What if I never actually become fluent?
Right.
And that fear almost made me give up before I even really started.
Yeah, it appears that this is such a common experience. The key is to recognize that fear is a natural part of the process. It doesn't mean that you're not capable or that you should just give up.
Right.
Instead, you can kind of reframe it and think of it as an opportunity to break down that big, scary goal into smaller, much more manageable steps.
So it's like instead of focusing on the huge end goal of becoming fluent, you might start with something much smaller, like I'm going to learn 5 new verbs this week.
Right.
Or I'm going to watch 1 short video in English without subtitles today.
Exactly. And studies show that when you focus on these smaller actions, you can kind of trick your brain into feeling less overwhelmed.
Okay.
So instead of feeling like you're facing this massive mountain, you're just taking a few steps up a hill. And then as you complete those smaller tasks, you start to gain this sense of accomplishment.
That's so important.
And that builds your confidence. It motivates you to keep going.
Yeah, that's a really interesting way to look at it. But what about all those pesky distractions that seem to pop up everywhere we look?
Oh, yeah.
I feel like my phone, especially, is this black hole that sucks up all of my time and energy. So how can we resist that temptation to just scroll endlessly through social media or get lost in YouTube videos when we're supposed to be studying?
Well, it appears that we live in a world that's pretty much designed for distraction, There's notifications constantly fighting for our attention, and it's just so easy to fall into that trap of instant gratification. But there are definitely things you can do to combat these distractions and regain control of your time and your focus.
Okay, I'm all ears. What are some practical strategies that we can use to fight back against the distraction monster?
Well, one of the most effective techniques is something called time boxing. Have you ever heard of that?
Time boxing.
Yeah.
That sounds intense. Is it like boxing but with time? Should I be wearing a helmet for this?
No helmets are required.
Okay.
Time boxing is basically just the act of allocating specific blocks of time in your schedule for certain tasks. So let's say instead of just saying, I'm going to study English sometime today, you would actually schedule it in your calendar.
Right.
Maybe from 7:00 p.m. to 7:30 p.m. Yeah.
And then you treat that time as non-negotiable, just like you would an important meeting or a doctor's appointment.
Ah, I see. So it's like you're creating this clear boundary for yourself, this dedicated space in your day where you can just focus on English without the temptation to get sidetracked by other things.
Precisely. And the key to time boxing is being realistic. Don't try to cram in hours and hours of study if you know you're not going to be able to maintain your focus for that long.
Yeah.
So start with shorter blocks of time, maybe 25 minutes or even just 15 minutes.
Okay.
And then gradually you can increase the duration as you build up your concentration muscle.
Okay, that sounds manageable.
Yeah.
I like that it's about finding what works for you and your schedule rather than trying to force yourself into some rigid routine.
Exactly. The goal is to create a system that you can actually stick with, one that's sustainable, even on those days when your motivation is a little bit low. Because, let's be real, motivation isn't always going to be there.
Oh, tell me about it.
Some days I wake up feeling super inspired, ready to tackle my goals. Other days, it takes all of my energy just to get out of bed.
Mm-hmm.
So if motivation is so fickle, what can we actually rely on when those kind of blah days hit? Because they always do.
Well, that's where discipline comes in.
Okay?
Discipline is really the key to bridging that gap between the days when you feel super motivated and the days when you just don't.
Yeah.
It's about just showing up and doing the work, even when it feels hard, even when you'd rather be doing something else.
Discipline, huh? That word always feels a bit intimidating, like it requires this superhuman level of willpower.
Right.
Is there any way to make it feel less daunting, maybe a little less scary?
It appears that one of the best ways to cultivate discipline is to just start small. Focus on consistency. Instead of trying to overhaul your entire routine overnight, just choose one small habit you want to implement. Something like, I'm going to study English for 15 minutes every day before bed, or I will listen to an English podcast during my commute.
Right, so it's about making those small, consistent actions a part of your daily routine, almost like brushing your teeth or having your morning coffee.
Exactly. And the more you practice discipline in these small ways, the stronger that muscle becomes.
Okay.
And then it's easier to apply it to bigger challenges. So it's kind of like building this foundation for success, brick by brick.
I love that analogy.
Mm-hmm.
So this is giving me a lot to think about. I'm starting to see how fear and distractions and even just our own mindset can play a really big role in our ability to achieve those goals that we set for ourselves.
Mm-hmm.
We've talked a lot about the challenges, but what about the flip side? Like, what are some of the rewards and benefits that come with actually overcoming those obstacles and making progress towards our goals, especially when it comes to something like learning English?
Oh, the rewards are incredible. Just imagine yourself confidently communicating in English, expressing your thoughts and ideas with ease, connecting with people from different cultures,
Yeah.
opening up a world of opportunities both personally and professionally.
That sounds amazing. It's like unlocking this whole new level of freedom and potential.
Exactly. It appears that learning a new language can be so transformative.
Yeah.
It expands your horizons, it challenges your perspectives, and it can even rewire your brain in these fascinating ways that can enhance your cognitive abilities and boost your creativity.
Okay, I'm officially inspired. I feel like I have a much better understanding of the dynamics at play here. We've covered a lot of ground, but I'm curious to dive a little deeper into the specific strategies and techniques we can use to actually overcome those moments of laziness and actually make those dreams a reality. So I'm ready to get practical.
I like your enthusiasm. And you're in luck because we have a whole toolbox of practical tips and techniques to share. So let's move on to the next phase of our discussion, where we'll explore how to break free from that procrastination cycle and create a real roadmap for success.
Perfect. Let's do it.
So we've talked about, breaking down those goals into smaller steps and managing all those distractions. But what about those times when you're actually sitting down ready to study?
And your motivation just disappears.
Oh, I know exactly what you mean.
It's like even just opening your textbook feels as daunting as climbing Mount Everest.
It's like my brain suddenly decides that checking the weather for the next 5 years is a way more important task than actually learning English.
Yeah.
How do we overcome that? How do we overcome that inertia, that resistance to getting started?
Well, it appears that one really powerful technique is to use a psychological principle called the Zeigarnik effect.
The Zeigarnik effect.
Yeah.
That sounds very scientific and intriguing.
Right.
Tell me more.
Well, studies show that the Zeigarnik effect is basically our tendency to remember unfinished or interrupted tasks more clearly than completed ones.
Oh, okay.
It's like our brain has this built-in reminder system for things that we've left incomplete.
So you're saying that if I start a task but don't finish it, it's more likely to stay on my mind and kind of bug me until I go back and actually complete it.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And we can actually use this to our advantage when it comes to motivation.
So instead of trying to force yourself to complete an entire study session in one beatie,
Yeah.
try breaking it up into smaller chunks and intentionally leave one task unfinished.
Interesting. So, for example, if I'm working on a set of vocabulary flashcards, I could stop midway through the deck and then come back to the rest later.
Exactly. By leaving that task unfinished, you create this sort of tension in your mind,
Oh, okay.
this mental itch that you'll be more inclined to scratch later by going back and finishing it.
That's such a clever strategy. It's like creating a cliffhanger for your own brain. It makes me want to find out what happens next.
Exactly. It taps into our natural curiosity and that desire for closure.
Mm.
So next time you're feeling stuck, try leaving a task strategically unfinished, and you might be surprised at how much more motivated you feel to come back and complete it later.
That's brilliant.
Right.
I'm definitely going to try that. Now, let's talk about another challenge that I think a lot of our listeners can relate to. Willpower depletion. It's like our willpower is this finite resource that just gets drained throughout the day.
Yeah.
And then by the time we get around to actually sitting down to study, there's nothing left in the tank.
It appears that willpower depletion is a very real phenomenon. And studies show that our ability to resist temptations and make decisions that align with our long-term goals actually weakens as we exert self-control throughout the day.
That explains why it's so much harder to resist those late-night snack cravings after a long day of making responsible choices.
Exactly. So how do we actually combat this willpower depletion? And how do we make sure we have enough energy left to actually dedicate to our language learning goals?
Yeah, that's a great question.
Well, one effective strategy is to prioritize your most important tasks for the times of day when your willpower is at its highest.
So for those of us who are morning people, that might mean tackling English studies first thing in the day before work, or other responsibilities drain our willpower.
Precisely. And then if you're more of a night owl, you might find that you're more focused and productive in the evenings. It's really about experimenting and finding what works best for you, for your individual rhythm.
That makes a lot of sense. It's about working with our natural energy flows rather than trying to fight against them.
Exactly. Now, another strategy for managing willpower is to create systems and routines that can automate your decision-making so you don't need to use as much self-control.
Can you give me an example of what that looks like in practice?
Sure. Let's say you're trying to limit your social media use so you have more time for English. Now, instead of relying solely on willpower to resist that temptation to scroll, you could create a system where you designate specific times for checking social media, maybe just for 15 minutes in the morning and then 15 minutes in the evening.
Right.
And then during your study time, you disable notifications or maybe even delete those apps from your phone altogether.
That's such a good idea.
Yeah.
It takes the pressure off of having to constantly make those decisions in the moment, which can be so draining.
Exactly. So by creating those systems and routines, you're essentially setting yourself up for success by just minimizing the need for willpower in the first place.
This is all so insightful. I'm starting to feel like I have a much clearer understanding of how to approach my language learning goals in a way that really works with my natural energy levels and my own decision-making patterns.
That's great to hear. Remember, self-awareness is so important. When you actually understand your own strengths and weaknesses, you can then tailor your strategies to maximize your chances of success.
So we've talked a lot about these internal factors that impact our motivation and our productivity.
Yeah.
But what about the external environment? Can our surroundings actually play a role in our ability to focus and learn effectively?
Absolutely. It appears that our environment can have a really profound impact on our state of mind and our ability to concentrate. Studies show that creating a dedicated study space, one that's free from distractions and clutter, can significantly improve your focus and productivity.
So it's not just about what's going on in our heads, but also about actually setting up the right external conditions for success.
Exactly. Think about it this way. If you're trying to write a really important email in a noisy, chaotic coffee shop,
Right.
you're probably going to have a much harder time focusing than if you were working in a quiet, organized office.
That's such a clear analogy.
Yeah.
I can definitely relate to that feeling of trying to concentrate in the middle of chaos. It's like trying to swim upstream.
Exactly. So when it comes to creating a really good study environment for yourself, there are a few key things to keep in mind.
Okay.
First, try to find a dedicated space that you can really associate with learning. Maybe this is a desk in your bedroom or a quiet corner in your living room, or even a spot at your local library. The important thing is that you have this designated area where you can really focus on your studies.
That makes sense. Having a dedicated space really helps to create that mental separation between study time and leisure time.
Exactly. Next, you want to pay attention to the lighting in your space. Make sure you have ample light and preferably natural light if possible.
Okay.
Studies show that natural light can really boost your mood, it can reduce eye strain, and it can also improve your alertness.
So ditch the dimly lit basement and embrace the sunshine.
Precisely. Now, another key factor is minimizing distractions. So this means silencing your phone, closing unnecessary tabs on your computer, and maybe even letting your family or your roommates know that you need some uninterrupted study time.
Right. It's about creating that bubble of focus
Yeah.
where you can fully immerse yourself in the learning process.
Exactly. And finally, don't underestimate the power of personalization. Make your study space somewhere that you actually enjoy being. Decorate it with things that inspire you, whether that's plants or artwork or even motivational quotes. The goal is to really create an environment that feels welcoming and conducive to learning.
That is such valuable advice. I feel like I'm already starting to envision my own ideal study sanctuary.
Yeah.
A place where I can escape the distractions of daily life and really fully immerse myself in the world of English.
That's wonderful to hear. Remember, creating an optimal study environment is an ongoing process. It's about experimenting and making adjustments and finding what truly works best for you.
This has been such an enlightening conversation. We've explored, the inner workings of motivation, willpower, and even the impact of our environment. But before we wrap up, I'm curious to hear your thoughts on one more aspect of this ambition-laziness paradox. We've talked a lot about achieving goals, but what about the importance of rest and rejuvenation?
That's such a good point. In our pursuit of goals, it's so easy to just get caught up in the hustle, and we often forget the importance of rest and self-care. But just like a car needs to refuel our minds, and our bodies also need time to recharge.
So it's not about pushing ourselves relentlessly 24/7, but about finding that balance between effort and recovery.
Exactly. It appears that when we're chronically stressed or sleep deprived, our cognitive functions, including our ability to learn and retain information, are significantly impaired.
That makes total sense.
Yeah.
It's like trying to run a marathon without ever stopping for water or a break. You'll eventually hit a wall.
Precisely. So how do we incorporate this rest and rejuvenation into our already busy lives? Well, one effective strategy is to schedule regular breaks into your study sessions.
So instead of trying to power through hours of studying without stopping, it's better to aim for those shorter, more focused bursts of learning, interspersed with breaks for rest and relaxation.
Exactly. And studies show that even short breaks, even just 5 or 10 minutes, can significantly improve your focus and retention. And during these breaks, get up and move around, stretch, maybe step outside for some fresh air or do something completely unrelated to studying, just to give your mind a chance to reset.
That sounds like a much more sustainable approach to learning.
Right.
And it sounds more enjoyable, too. It's not about deprivation,
Yeah.
but about finding that sweet spot where effort and recovery work together to help you achieve those optimal results.
Exactly. And remember, rest is not a luxury. It's a necessity. It's an investment in your well-being and ultimately your ability to achieve your goals in the long run.
This has been such a valuable conversation. I feel like I have this whole new toolkit for approaching my language learning journey and making it a much more positive experience. So we've explored the psychology of motivation, the importance of environment, and the power of rest. But before we wrap up this episode, I want to leave our listeners with a challenge, something to think about as they continue on their own English learning adventures.
I love that idea. What challenge do you have in mind?
Well, I think it'd be really helpful for our listeners to consider one small action that they can take today to create a more supportive and inspiring learning environment for themselves.
That's a fantastic challenge. It's a good reminder that we actually have the power to shape our surroundings and create those conditions that set us up for success.
So, dear listeners, what will your one small action be? Will you declutter your study space? Will you create a cozy reading nook? Or maybe even invest in some noise-canceling headphones to minimize distractions?
The choice is entirely yours. But remember, even the smallest changes can make a really big difference.
Okay, so as we wrap up our deep dive into this whole world of ambition and laziness, especially when it comes to learning English, I really hope you're all feeling energized and inspired.
Yeah, it appears that we really uncovered a lot of great insights, didn't we?
We did. We really did. So from understanding like how procrastination works in our brains to creating that perfect study space, we've explored so many different ways to help you all beat those lazy moments and actually make some progress towards your language goals.
Right. We've learned that fear can be a huge obstacle, but if we can break down those big, scary goals into smaller steps, steps that feel manageable,
Yeah.
we can actually start to chip away at that fear and build our confidence along the way.
And we also discovered that distractions, they're absolutely everywhere. But with a little planning and some smart strategies like time boxing or creating those tech-free zones, we can actually take back control of our attention and make space for focused learning.
Hmm. Studies show willpower depletion is a real thing, but if we can learn to prioritize our most important tasks for those times when our energy is high and create systems that, you know, take some of that decision-making pressure off of us,
Yeah.
we can actually save our willpower and make it a lot easier to stick to our study plans.
For sure. And let's not forget about the importance of environment.
Right.
We've talked about, the power of having that dedicated study space, a sanctuary where we can minimize distractions and really maximize our focus.
And maybe most importantly, we've really talked about the need for rest and rejuvenation. It's not about pushing ourselves to the limit all the time. It's about finding that balance between working hard and taking breaks, knowing that when we take care of ourselves, we're really setting ourselves up for success in the long run.
Absolutely. So, dear listeners, as you continue on your English learning journey, please be patient with yourselves.
Yeah.
Celebrate all those little victories along the way, and don't be afraid to try different things until you find what really works for you.
It appears that learning a language is more like a marathon, not a sprint. So there will be days when you feel motivated and unstoppable, and then other days where you just want to hit that snooze button on everything.
Oh, yeah.
And that's totally normal.
So normal. The key is to keep showing up, even when it feels hard, even when you'd rather be doing anything else. Because every little step that you take, every effort that you make, it's all bringing you closer to that goal, that vision of yourself, confidently speaking English, and just, unlocking all these incredible possibilities.
Exactly. So as we wrap up this episode, we want to leave you with a final thought.
Yes. What's one small thing that you can do today to make your English learning journey more fun and maybe even a little more inspiring?
Will you join an online conversation group? Will you watch a movie in English with subtitles? Or maybe even just treat yourself to a delicious cup of tea while you're reading a good English novel?
It's all up to you. Just remember that even the smallest actions can create big positive change. So embrace the challenge, explore, be curious, and most importantly, have fun.
Thank you all so much for joining us on The Deep Dive. We'll see you next time.
Happy learning, everyone.
Bye.
If you enjoyed this episode, please like and subscribe. It really helps our channel grow and reach more English learners like you. By subscribing, you'll never miss a new episode, and by liking the video, you're letting us know you want more helpful content. Thank you for your support. It means so much to us.